Business 100, Chapter 9, Leadership and Decision Making. So we talk about the nature of leadership, the processes and behaviors used by someone, so processes and behaviors, such as a manager to motivate, inspire, and influence the behaviors of others. So if I was going to describe a former supervisor with regard to these three attributes, I think of a person that really focused on, I guess you'd call it sticking to the knitting type of approach. Really focused on these are the important things. Let's keep track of these things, and we are going to be driven by measures that can actually decide how well you're doing in those things. So that sort of behavior was allowed us to be motivated, inspired, and influenced, I guess. So it really possessed all three attributes. One of the things that was also good about this person is they did not really tolerate any people that just wanted to do kind of a razzle dazzle thing where they, here's some nice graphs and here's some fluffy things that we're doing. He wanted things that are very numerical driven so that you could actually measure performance. So that was good. Sometimes he didn't bear very well with people that would try to, pull the proverbial wool over his eyes. So how did they attempt to succeed at leadership? I think that they were effective leaders. They weren't necessarily this person wasn't necessarily the touchy-feely, trying to please people, but he certainly was able to motivate you in a productive way, and perhaps, unfortunately, maybe a little bit in a fearful way. So distinctions between management and leadership, and you see there's these two Venn diagrams, and there is overlap, and that overlap could actually be quite a bit of overlap or almost no overlap. So management is planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Leadership is agenda setting, aligning, inspiring, monitoring. So think about planning is you're kind of more or less maintaining the status quo. You're doing the things you need to do to be successful, but it's more of a maintenance issue. It's not really an improvement perspective, where leadership more or less goes along the lines of this is where we're going and trying to get everybody in on the same page and really focusing on let's channel all our efforts towards this vision of where we're going. And so that was really oftentimes a motivational approach. So that's the leadership component. So leadership and power, and we talk about legitimate power, but there's also reward power, the power to give or withdraw rewards. And so what kind of rewards? Some of those rewards are pay raises or let's send you to a conference because you did such a great job. Sometimes it's things like the people that were the top sellers, we're going to send them on a 2-week European vacation. So it's all sorts of rewards that could fall under the reward power. Coercive power, a viable power. Sometimes it's a very negative power, so you have to be very, very careful with it. But the power to force compliance, people doing what you want by means of psychological, emotional, or physical threat. So isn't it illegal to threaten someone? Well, the answer to that is you're not physically threatening harm. It says physical threat, but it's really more of you're not threatening harm to the person, but you're saying if you don't improve your work performance, then we will demote you or we will let you go. So that's really the threat that they're referring to. Some of the types of psychological threats, and this is really getting into some gray area here in my opinion, but that could be such things as being mean to the person, snapping at the person, so it makes you feel like your job is not very secure, and it's almost sometimes it's more of a behaviors than it is a threat, and like a termination type of threat. And some types of emotional threats are very close to psychological. They make you feel bad or you're worried. And what are some types of physical threats? You know what, I don't really think that there's really a lot of physical threats, unless of course you're in an organization where you were in a criminal organization where there's physical threats. But of course that is coercive power. leadership and power. Referent power is power based on identification, imitation, loyalty, or charisma. So when we talk about referent power, we really are saying here's somebody in our organization that's not necessarily our boss. It could be, but it's not necessarily somebody who's our boss that you, for some reason, you really relate to, and you just are drawn to those people. And so that's the referent power thing. So identification is like, you know what this person's thinking is really what I am thinking, or I want to think like that. And loyalty is, I'm going to protect that person because I think this person is a great person. Of course, charisma is that, again, you want to be in a situation where you want to please them because they're just so exciting and to be around. Expert power is different because there's an expertise. You go to this person when you want someone to tell you how to proceed. It could be a manager, it could be a supervisor, it could also be other people that have some specific knowledge. It's like, well, let me go ask so-and-so what we should do about this particular problem, since they're the ones that designed the product or the service. So those are all expert power. So, for example, knows how to interact with difficult customers. That could be expert power. It's like, oh, I'm having a problem with one of my customers. How do you deal with that problem? And so they say, well, I deal with it this way. And so you may want to think about this. So that's an example of interacting with difficult customers. Possesses specialized technical skills. Again, they could be someone who knows about statistics, trying to do some statistical analysis. It could be that they know about the product and all its functions. So you go to those people because they have technical skills. Knows how to navigate the corporate bureaucracy. And that's really a situation where you have someone that you say, well, how do I get this done? It just seems I can never get anybody to approve this or that. And they say, you know what, this is what you do. And so they have the ability to navigate the bureaucracy. So there's approach to leadership called the trait approach. Is like, you have this trait, you have this trait, you have this trait, therefore you are a leader. Unfortunately, what ends up happening is the list of potential leadership traits becomes so long it loses any practical value because the traits vary by situation. So some people may be a quiet person and they may be highly effective as a leader, and other people may be very boisterous. It all depends on the people that are working for that person as well as the situation. So again, that's why so long a list. There's a behavioral approach which takes a little bit different look at it, and that says, how do effective leaders behave? We're not necessarily looking about their characteristics in terms of traits, like are they smart, are they strong-willed? No, it's really the behaviors. And it says the researchers assumed that the behaviors of effective leaders differed somehow from the behaviors of less effective leaders. And is this approach valid? Like traits, it kind of all depends. It all depends on the situation, the people that are working for that person. So there's pieces that make sense, but I don't think I would call it this explains everything fully. There's two basic forms of leaders. Is a task-focused leader, and they're really focused on do this task, do this task, do this task. And then there's the employee-focused leader, which is more about how to make the employers happy by, talking to them, understanding their issues, trying to accommodate them. And again, one is not better than the other, and they're not necessarily in isolation. You could be an employee-focused leader because you really care about your employees, and you could also be very task driven as well. So it's not one or the other. When is being a task focused leader beneficial? It's especially beneficial when you have projects and you're trying to achieve certain goals. And so you say, well, we're going to do this task, and then that's going to lead to this goal. And then this next task builds upon the first task, and so on and so forth. And when is being an employee focused one beneficial? Well, I think it's beneficial, in my opinion, most, if not all of the time, because you're trying to understand the people, and they're so much more than just a commodity or someone that is that's replaceable, that can be put in a position. You're trying to, make sure that they are being productive and effective and happy. The situational approach assumes that the appropriate leader behavior varies from one situation to another. And there's truth to that, and there's falsehoods to that. Yes, you behave differently in certain situations, but there's also, I believe, probably a core behavior that's associated with your personality and how you function that stays relatively the same. So if I had to say it another way, is ballpark, probably 70% of your approach to leadership remains unchanged across pretty much all situations, and then 30% varies based on what you need. Like if you're pressed for deadlines, you might be much more like a dictator, whereas if you have a little bit more time, you might be more relaxed, but still your basic behavior structure, I believe, would be relatively similar. And there's the path goal theory, and it says it makes valued or desired rewards available in the workplace, and to clarify the subordinate, the kinds of behaviors that will lead to the goal. So essentially is, here's what you do if you do a good job, and this is how it will be measured. And so that's what it means in simple terms. There's a decision tree approach in which they provide decision rules for deciding how much participation to allow, and I think if you're getting to that point, you may have lost track of where you're going. Sometimes the decision tree is something that's kind of internalized, and you try to empower people to the greatest extent that you can, and you provide support for those people, and that's really how the decision tree approach is probably best internalized. There's a transformational leadership. Some experts believe that change is such a vital organizational function that you need to really focus on doing that. You can't be satisfied with things going the way they are. You always have to challenge and push yourself in different ways, and push the people that report to you in different ways, so that you are always somewhat focused on certain goals. And that is obviously works in some situations. For me, I've always gravitated towards that, so I'm very much aligned with that. But again, I'm not saying it's that absolutely necessary. It's just something that I would probably, I would tend to gravitate towards based on my past experiences. Charisma. Here's an interesting thing. First of all, charisma is a form of interpersonal attraction that inspires support and acceptance. Do you have to be likable to have charisma? Actually, no. You could be perhaps caustic and abrasive, but it's like I like this person even though they speak their mind and they have charisma, but I don't like the person. General crucial elements of charismatic leadership. Charismatic leaders envision likely future trends. They set high expectations, and they meet or exceed those expectations themselves in terms of behavior. So it's really is like, yeah, I want to jump on board this train, and I want to ride with this person because they seem like they really know where they're going, and I can really get motivated behind what they're doing and where they are leading us. So that's number one. Number two, they demonstrate personal excitement, personal confidence, and consistent patterns of success. So people are really saying to the charismatic leaders, just being around you is very stimulating, and I feel energized, and your behaviors I've seen tend to be successful, so I want to emulate or copy those. And number three, they are enable others by supporting them, empathizing, which means trying to think what they're thinking, trying to understand what they're understanding, and expressing confidence in them. In other words, they are empowering them. They're saying, you know what, you can do this. I trust that you can do this. I will provide support that you are successful in doing this. And in many cases, I will take responsibility if you fail so that you are not inhibited or, by a potential failure. When we talk about leadership substitutes, if certain factors are present, the employee will perform his or her job capably without the direction of a leader. And it's one of those jobs where you kind of do this job and it's very clearly defined, perhaps repetitive. So you say, you know what, your job is to make the pizza. Well, I know how to make the pizza. I've been making the pizza for a while and I don't really need to be supervised. And you also perhaps have measured goals and quotas that you have to meet. So obviously you're going to be meeting them. Otherwise, there'll be repercussions. But again, you kind of do it on your own. And leadership neutralizers, they're saying even if a leader is present, an effective leader, is that sometimes those leadership behaviors will be ineffective or neutralized by various factors called leadership neutralizers. So that could be, you may be a highly charismatic leader, but your organization may be showing continual loss of sales, for extended period of time. So you think, even though this person is effective, we're just on a downward spiral. Nobody wants a rotary dial telephone anymore. We just don't want that. Even though this leader is effective, that, the business for rotary old-fashioned phones are just not there. So that's an example of a neutralizer. Of course, here's leadership substitutes, neutralizer examples. Research suggests that female leaders are not necessarily more nurturing or supportive than male leaders. It all just depends on the person. And likewise, male leaders are not systematically harsher, more controlling, or more task-focused than female leaders. It really depends on the person. Cross-cultural leadership. And one of the things I want to just emphasize on this is sometimes this stuff is very difficult to implement. I mean, the idea of it is fantastic, but sometimes it's difficult to implement just because you have more than one competing attribute or influence within an employee's life. So they may be more gender centered than cultural centered. They may be more cultural centered than gender centered. They may be more cultural centered than race centered, and vice versa. They may be more individual focus versus culture focus. They say, my culture kind of generally leads to this sort of behaviors, but I don't really ascribe to that. I'm much more, this culture says we're much more boisterous, but I tend to be more on the quiet side, for example. And so that'd be an example of that. So there's so many factors involved. It's sometimes is a challenge, difficult to implement. When we talk about decision making, there's oftentimes, different ways to approach it. For example, if you're going to buy a new refrigerator, I didn't want to do a car because people sometimes are very specific about that, but something more generic like a refrigerator, how would you decide? So you kind of go through that process of how will I decide which refrigerator to buy? So you say, there's so many of them out there. There's different colors, there's different sizes, there's side-by-sides, there's French doors with the bottom refrigerator, there's ones with the bottom refrigerator. And so you go through this process, and it's different for different people. You say, well, first of all, one of the things you decide on is you may say, I want stainless steel, or I want a white refrigerator or a black refrigerator. So you sometimes decide on things that are relatively easy for you, especially if the rest of your kitchen appliances you want to be similar. So that may make it easier. Another thing that may happen with the refrigerator is you may say, I don't like to bend over all the time to get in my refrigerator. I just don't like that bending. It just kind of gets to be bothersome over time. So therefore, I want the freezer on the bottom. And that may be the reason why. Or you may say, I want an ice maker, or I don't want an ice maker. So I may narrow it down. Or I only have this much space for this refrigerator, so I am limited to 20 cubic foot refrigerator. All these factors play into it, and then you decide. But if you're going to buy a new notebook, how would you decide? Your decision process is going to be much simpler. You're going to say, let's see, I want college ruled, I want something that's cheap, and I need about 100 pages, and that may be the criteria, and you don't really spend a lot of time deliberating on it. Managers must treat each one as unique, investing enormous amounts of time. This is for non-programmed decisions. Non-programmed is more of the refrigerator buying one than the notebook buying one, okay? Notebook is programmed. So they may invest enormous amounts of time, energy, and resources into exploring the situation from all perspectives. The more expensive and consequential it is, the more time you may likely spend. For example, buying a notebook obviously is programmed, but buying a refrigerator is like, $1,000, something like that, $1,500. But buying a car, that may take, especially if you don't know what you want, you want something that's reliable, so you look at reliable ones for example. You may spend more time in that process. Buying a house may spend more time, and hopefully when it comes to selecting a spouse, or you may spend even more time, or hopefully you do spend more time. You may spend weeks, months, even years until you decide. So, state of risk, when the availability of each alternative and its potential payoffs and costs are all associated with varying degrees of uncertainty. So again, relationships, the risk you're willing to take is maybe a lot different than your first professional job. So how you decide regarding relationships, again, you may spend months and even years getting to know a person, trying to decide whether it's going to work out for whatever attributes are important to you. And then regarding your first professional job, it may be, well, I chose to go into finance, so therefore I want to work in an organization that is this, and I want to work in this geographic area. And so you make those decisions, and sometimes the decisions are very, very personal. They're not really an objective process. It may be very, very predetermined by, I want to live near my parents, or I don't want to live near my parents, or I want to live near ski slopes, or I want to live near the beach. And so sometimes it's factors that aren't even related to the job that help drive your decision. Rational decision making. The interesting thing about decision making is oftentimes, and there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell on it, people make decisions, but you make them from an irrational manner, and then they try to justify it and then believe that it's rational. So you say, I just have to live near the beach. I just have to live near the beach, and because I just want to be able to go out and hang out at the beach on a regular basis. So then you say, well, I'm going to rationalize it because, I believe that the wages are better near the coast. I believe that people will come to see me more. And so you try to make these rational justifications when maybe your fundamental underlying reason is irrational. Steps. This is a nice thing, but some people don't take these steps. People aren't really focused on the steps in many cases. Again, more continuation of steps. Again, I don't put a lot of credence into the steps in rational decision making just because there are many. It's much more of an internalized process, I think, for many people. Behavioral aspects: coalition, you form an informal alliance of individuals. That's a coalition. So that may be like friends deciding what to do tonight. You're not necessarily bound in any way except that you want to go do something and agree on what you're going to do. Of course, you have intuition as far as behavioral aspects, and that's just, more or less what feels right. What kind of decision should I make? What feels right? What feels like the right thing to do? And sometimes that is not even, that's a pretty decent compass to use. There's escalation of commitment, condition in which a decision maker becomes so committed to a course of action that he or she stays with it even when it appears to have been wrong. Oh yes, I've been going out with this person for 2 years now, and I've kind of indicated that I want to get married to this person, and you know what? I don't know that this is a good idea, but I've kind of made some promises, and I don't want to break those promises because it makes me feel like I might be a bad person. So again, you may continue on with a course of action even if it is possibly or even probably wrong. Risk propensity. And so how comfortable are you in risky situations? And on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being very willing, how comfortable are you making risky decisions? You're like, oh gosh, I can't decide. I can't even decide, well, I'm going to have toast or cereal for breakfast. I mean, just those decisions are just driving me crazy. Obviously, that's probably closer to a 1 or a 0.5. And 5 is, I'll do anything that involves risk in terms of my career, my future, anything. I'm just very, very stimulated by that, for example, and that would be a 5.